The story starts with young students and an incident at a military academy they're attending. It evolves into a simple love story between the hero, Squall, and heroine, Renoa, but it also incorporates rivalries and battles. We decided to keep the story simple and make the characters more involved, because previous stories in the series got very complicated. We had the firm belief that expressive characters can be used to tell the simple story of a guy and girl, worthy of hours of gameplay, so we chose a story like this. The most appealing element is the characters. What we wanted to do was give life to characters in the game. We've been striving for that since the days of 2D graphics. We tried to enhance motions and facial expressions. With 3D, we can really do that. The difference between Square and the competition is that they're resigned to the fact that digital pictures are cold and inhuman. They've given up on their quest to make their characters more lifelike, while we have never given up on trying to create more red-blooded characters like in the movies. Final Fantasy VIII is a voluminous game, so one person can't generate all of the ideas in a game of this nature. We got ideas from many different parties on this 100-plus person development team. I get my inspiration from everyday life. For instance, I took my child to a Disneyland parade one afternoon. Watching it sparked the idea for the Witches Parade in the game. Small things in life trigger my ideas, so when we began to make Final Fantasy VIII, my ideas converged, and I began pulling them out of my mental library. We start with a script that a writer develops. From that, a storyboard is drawn by graphic and character designers. The storyboard then goes to the motion capture studio, where we invite actors to do motion capture and act out roles that map to the storyline. Actors wear sensors on their bodies so we can capture data that accurately recreates the motion of their bodies. Simultaneously, we capture their facial expressions on video, hand animate it in an animation studio, and put it together with the motion capture for a full screen that looks realistic. In Final Fantasy VIII, we wanted more expressive characters, so we focused on 3D graphics and motion capture to achieve that level of detail. We used motion capture for 3D body animation, but since we couldn't use that for facial expressions, we had actors to act out facial expressions that we videotaped. Then we used animators to hand animate these facial expressions based on the tapes. Our biggest challenge in creating the Final Fantasy world was to get a beautiful picture for the game. It couldn't be a photo-like image. Instead, we tried to create a picture, a game graphic that was similar to a painting and not a movie or animation. It's easy to create a photo-like picture with the right tools. It's harder when you want to create a look similar to a painting. For that, you need a cohesive team that knows how to work with the right nuances of light, shadows, and colors. The biggest element in the design of this game has to do with the countries we've created. We developed several countries, each with its own culture and history. Different team members worked on each country so that each destination would have a unique look and feel. Given that each country has its own lights and colors, the artwork is deeply rooted. This is something that other role-playing games don't have. Compared to the comical look of the Final Fantasy VII, where characters' heads were bigger than their bodies, Final Fantasy VIII's characters are much more realistic. Also, the town scenery is more authentic, and the small details, such as the chairs, tables, and roads, have been made to fit the characters. There's even a sense of scale as the characters walk around town. I come up with the basics of the personality, such as a character's being reticent. Later on, when the character is made to speak lines, the scriptwriter builds on what I have. In essence, we collaborate to develop the character more fully. In regard to the in-game movies, the way we added realism was by paying attention to the rate at which characters blinked. If you're not careful, your characters could go on indefinitely without blinking, so our characters blinked at normal rates, a detail that enhances the game's realism. In the beginning, I was going to make Squall a reticent character, but as another team member pointed out, that would make him the same as another character from Final Fantasy VII, Cloud. We had to differentiate the two, so the scriptwriter and I decided to make Squall initially quiet, but when a subject interests him, he will talk a lot. It's those kinds of details that went into fleshing out characters. In contrast, Renoa was just going to be a contrasting character to Squall, just to make them different, a darker history versus a cheerful brightness. So we started to make her cheerful, but then also made her have weaknesses that Squall would have to compensate for. This is the type of fleshing out of characters that goes into the game. The details don't come out all at once. We worked on them as the story progresses. We completed them as the story was completed. I receive the design drawings from the designer. It's a 2D illustration, and I make it into a 3D model. A real-world analogy might be like taking clay and making it into a sculpture. My work is like sculpting inside the computer. After I receive the finished model from the model team, I add on-screen motion for acts such as attacks and damages for the fight scenes. I add detailed paintings to the completely white models that come from the model team. Let me give you one example. Final Fantasy VII character models were jointed, so sometimes you could tell where those connections were. But in Final Fantasy VIII, we used a model called single skin that makes it harder to figure out where the joints are. The characters look more polished and movements are smoother. In categories such as movies and sports, they all have universal elements that make them fun and entertaining. Video games also have many of these same compelling elements that draw in the fans. So we as game designers need to recognize these entertaining elements that game players seek and then incorporate the fun factors into the product. The game player tends to spend most of their time in the battle system, so this is where a game designer like myself can get closest to the player. Here, I'm able to present new ideas that challenge the players. When I was producing the Final Fantasy VIII full-motion video, there were two key objectives. First was to make the characters' expressions in large crowd scenes as authentic as possible, which can only be done with full-motion video. The second was to incorporate more subtle full-motion video that is so seamlessly integrated into the game that the user doesn't feel the transition from video to actual gameplay. The ability to animate movement of hair and costumes is a great technology advancement. For example, there is a parade scene in Final Fantasy VIII with more than 1,000 animated characters. 2 years ago, we would not have been able to create a single scene with this many people. As a music composer, my role in the game is to provide oxygen to the player. In a video game, music is like emotional oxygen. Without oxygen, the game doesn't breathe. If the game has no sound, then the game players would be stifled. My job as composer is to provide oxygen to the game so that the player wouldn't feel so suffocated. In Final Fantasy VIII, the music plays a significant role because there are hidden scenarios that are only played out in the music. Lyrics in the song provide meaning to aspects of the game that are not explicitly told in the script. When the player listens to the songs and deciphers the lyrics, he can figure out intricate relationships between the characters and better understand the game. The biggest thing that we did that had never been done in the Final Fantasy series was to introduce songs with lyrics. For the opening scene, I wrote a score, then had the lyrics translated into Latin, then recorded the song with full choir. It's very powerful. My favorite song is in the closing sequence. The video and the music are matched very well. It's a very emotional sequence. Actually, to this day, when I hear the ending music, it still brings tears to my eyes. The Final Fantasy team constantly challenges itself to outdo its previous work. They're successful because with each new version, they develop new images, new sounds, and fresh ways of playing the game. We make platform choices based on 3 criteria. 1, does the platform have a field where we can express what we want in the game? 2, does it have an attractive global business model, and will it offer solid worldwide sales and market share sales and royalties? And 3, what does the future of the platform look like in terms of capabilities, not just for interactive, but for digital entertainment? There's an increasing amount of games that use 3D graphics on the PlayStation, not only Final Fantasy VIII. 3D continues to be hot, but right now, I don't see any games matching Square's ability to seamlessly move a game player from actual gameplay to a 3D movie and back to gameplay. In terms of the future, with increasing capacity of systems, we'll see more interactivity and more voice being incorporated into gameplay. Square is at the forefront of incorporating these elements into future games.
Squaresoft is a company that consistently has the highest quality graphics in their games. They have the best writing for their storylines. And they package things beautifully. Everything Squaresoft does is very, very classy. It's a company that doesn't do a whole lot of games, but when they do things, they just have a certain class, a certain style and quality about them that has made Squaresoft really one of the greatly influential companies. And when a Final Fantasy game comes out in Japan, it's an event. It is simply an event. We talk about Myst being the biggest CD-ROM game of all time. They sold 4 million units in over a 4 or 5 year span. Final Fantasy VIII sold over 3.5 million units in about a month in Japan. And now it's getting ready for a worldwide release. When Final Fantasy games come out, as I say, especially in Japan, this is a major event. The gulf between any Final Fantasy game and just about every other role-playing game is pretty wide. I know when I pick up a Final Fantasy game that it's going to have a strong storyline, that's going to have very high production values, that it's going to try and push the envelope as far as technology goes. Squaresoft is a company that invests millions and millions of dollars into having the leading technologies. And all of it shows in their games, game after game after game.
The anticipation for Final Fantasy VIII is going to be huge. What Final Fantasy VII did, which was really amazing, was traditionally role-playing games have appealed to about 10 to 15% of the market. You know, very dedicated part of the market, but not huge. And what Final Fantasy VII did was just explode that. And, you know, suddenly everyone wanted to play the game, and role-playing games were no longer kind of this niche thing. And so I think going into Final Fantasy VIII, you know, it's now a mass market thing, and Final Fantasy VIII is going to appeal to everybody. I think the reason consumers keep coming back to Final Fantasy, and have done since, you know, the 80s, is because they want more, you know. When the first Final Fantasy came out, the guy who was the programmer of it, Nazir Gabelli, you know, they called it Final Fantasy because this was going to be their last game. You know, they were just, you know, they were going to put everything they had into making this fantastic RPG, and it was going to be their last one, and they were all going to go off and do their own thing. And you know, they did it, and, you know, never mind the consumer reaction. I think the reaction of the original designers and programmers was, oh my God, we've made this thing is so cool, you know, we have to do another one. And so now we're on Final Fantasy VIII. And when a consumer sees Square on the box, they know that, you know, even if it's not Final Fantasy, even if it's one of Square's other games, this game is going to have amazing production values. This game has been tested to death to make sure it's fun, and, you know, this game is going to be solid.